But because we were not discussing the issue of now, okay, here is conflict in South Sudan. What are the things that you must now do practically to solve the conflict in South Sudan? We're not discussing that as an example. But you would have noticed, I'm sure, that even when President Obasanjo made his presentation, he referred to the fact that he had led a commission established by the African Union to look into the issue of human rights violations in South Sudan. And that commission deals specifically with the issue of justice in situations of conflict. But I'm saying that the reason it didn't get the prominence that you're talking about is because we're not discussing that issue. What do you do in terms of conflict resolution when it breaks out in this country? But these other broad matters which are very relevant to the issue. Now, with regard to the matter about the ICC, first of all, the African Union has taken a decision that there must be established an African Court of Justice. And the mandate of the Court of Justice would include the mandate of the International Criminal Court. Now, this is because, as you know, the ICC, in terms of the Rome Statute, the ICC is a court of last resort. Now, the issue that's arisen on the continent is that because the continent does not have, therefore, as a continent, it does not have a court of, therefore, first resort, as it were. Therefore, you would get these cases which would go to the ICC, simply because there's this gap. So let us fill this gap by establishing a court of justice with the same mandate, essentially, as the International Criminal Court has. That decision has been taken. The protocol to establish that Court of Justice has been completed. That protocol is in the process of approval, ratification by the various member states. So the continent is in the process of establishing an African Court of Justice. I'm saying with the same mandate as the ICC, because of exactly the determination of the African continent to be able to deal with the sorts of crimes which so far from the continent have been referred directly to the ICC because of the absence of an equivalent court on the continent. So the determination to deal with those sorts of crimes is there. The continent will come into force as soon as the requisite number of countries have approved the protocol, which is to establish a court, which protocol is with the various member states of the AU. So I'm saying that that's a reflection of the determination of the continent to deal with these sorts of crimes. Now, with regard to what the AU has said about that, so that's one thing it's doing. The AU is in the process of establishing that court so that any such offenses as occur in the continent would be tried on the continent, first of all. And the ICC then becomes a court of last resort in case it becomes necessary. What's happened, as you would recall in the AU discussed this matter as the African Union to say, what do we do? And raised questions which required, in the view of the African Union, some amendments to the Rome Statute. So the states parties to the Rome Statute met and discussed these things, and that discussion was going on. So as far as the AU is concerned, there's a continuing discussion about the matter as to how the continent relates to the ICC. The point has been raised by some member states of no, let us all leave, but I'm saying the discussion within African Union about that matter has not been completed. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Next question.
My name is Deo Mushi from Tanzania. I would like to ask my President Benjamin Mkapa a question. There is a famous journalist in Kenya. His name is Philip Ochieng. Philip normally says he has never enjoyed a vibrant media, like when he worked under President Mkapa when he was the editor of Daily News in Dar es Salaam sometimes back. He said that is the time he enjoyed the media and the freedom of the press. Now, The lady who was taking charge here yesterday asked a question. You asked that lady a question yesterday about what should be the role of the media in peace and security in Africa today. Please, if you would at least tell us where we are doing wrong or we are doing good, so that at least we may know how to go forward.
You are provoking a war between me and the media. Well, I am pleased that Philip Ochieng thinks we had the best working atmosphere in the field of media while he was working with me in the then government and then party newspapers. But as of now, I raised this question with Madam Gichuru because I wanted her to explain the role of the media, the positive role it can play to promote unity, understanding, to forewarn about imminent instability, and also to suggest ways in which conflict can be prevented. But to also recognize that some of the media people can be agents of negative change. They can sow the seeds of disunity. They can accelerate misunderstanding and the advent of instability, and therefore really cause the kind of conflicts that there are in Africa. But that's what I expected her to say, and therefore to draw the attention of the local media. And my plea would have been for the media, the national media or the continental media, to be Africans first, to understand the African interest, to also understand the extra-continental interest in Africa, so that when they report or make comment, they can safeguard the interests of our people in the continent. Far too often, we are reflecting the views of extra-continental journals or leaders about us, rather than reflecting the views of our leaders about our countries and our way forward by way of development and security. That is what I expected her to say, and that's what I am saying. I want more and more nationalism. I want more and more renaissance. I want more and more African identity in the analysis and in the promotion of solutions where conflicts have come about. That's all I can say.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Sophie Nompumelelo, I'll let you ask your questions back to back so that we take the next two questions are going to be the last questions for the day.
Sophie Mkwena from the SABC. I have three questions. One, what I have observed is that much as perhaps there's an attempt to ensure that every time different countries do go to elections, there's still a problem in ensuring that the Electoral Commission at a particular country is able to execute its duties in a fair and impartial manner. Did you look at that issue? How can the AU assist the different electoral institutions on the continent to ensure that they do the right thing? The second question, the issue of term of office of sitting heads of state. Is it perhaps not time for the AU to look at this issue? There should be a clear rule in terms of dealing with that, because every time you have elections, some people will resort to changing constitution to continue. How do we deal with that? And the last question, there was a request yesterday that perhaps a similar forum for sitting heads of state and ordinary people will be a good move, so that people can be able to engage with the sitting heads of state or leaders. And this shouldn't be seen as perhaps former leaders who are now complaining and not doing anything. Also, perhaps they don't have what power at that moment to effect any change? How do you deal with that so that people can have access to their leaders?
All I can say is that with regard to the first question, it is very regrettable that, that frequently now in Africa, when elections take place, the opposition never concedes defeat, and the government affirms it's having won the election. But it's not right to think that because there is a government and an electoral commission, therefore the electoral commission will work in the favor of the governing party. It is wrong. I know there are stories about the president saying, I appointed the commission, I appointed the election officers, the people in charge of the voting centers are all appointees of the government. But there are people of integrity who take their oath of office for the purposes of the election very seriously indeed. So it's regrettable, but that's human nature. It can't be that every time I will enter into an election if only I am certain that I will win. The election will be either someone wins or you lose and the other one, or you win and the other one loses. That's my answer. My plea would be really for free and fair elections. Of course, how you appoint the election commission, who you appoint to that election commission may have a factor, but there must be fairness. Secondly, what was the second one, I think? The term of office. My inclination is to encourage as many countries as possible in Africa because we are in the very early formative stages of nationhood and independence. 50 years is nothing in the history of the world. Because of that, I think it would be good to have a statute of limitation. They have a statute of limitation of 2 terms, maximum of 3 terms, absolutely maximum of 2 would be ideal. That would be my recommendation. But we are dealing with sovereign states and sovereign people. They must determine that. On the third one,
The request has to have a forum like this with
for sitting ones, that one I must pass on to President.
No, I think, President, I think this is a matter, I mean, it's a matter we can raise. I don't suppose that as NGOs, because we are NGOs, we can't convene current heads of state and heads of government. But I'm sure it's a matter that we can pass on to the African Union to say that, look, the matter has been raised, came up here, and let the AU structures, the chairperson of the African Union, chairperson of the African Union Commission, those sorts of officials of the AU, maybe we should say that. We will raise the matter with them. And really, it would have to be an AU initiative.
I'm saying this, Mr. President.
So,
Even as media, it would be nice to ask
everyone else, this is Sophie, it's not right. We are left with, I think, 7.5 minutes. I've already noted 2 hands. Those are the questions I'm going to take. I did note one other hand. Unfortunately, we're out of time. So it's Nompumelelo Khaya, and there's a last question. Okay, you the last question of the day, and then we're going to have closing comments from the Excellency Mohammed.
Good afternoon, Your Excellencies. My name is Nompumelelo Ngubeni. I'm from KFM News. I'd like to know your thoughts on claims that the Western countries are behind regime change on the continent. I just want to know, do you think this is an easy fallback positions for sitting leaders on the continent to take when their states are failing?
Nompumelelo, please repeat that question and just speak louder and slower.
I wanted to find out what your position is on claims that there's regime change on the continent is sparked by Western countries. Is this a simplistic fallback position by failing leaders?
Excellency Mohammed is going to respond to that.
We living and operating in a globalized world. So interferences, everybody can define how an interference is one way or the other, but the regime change issue, regimes belongs to their own people and to their own countries. These are basically and principally It's the people who are supposed to change the regime if it's not fit for them. But always, before we have been claiming and worrying about that the developed world or the Western world is interfering here and there, but now many times it went the other way around. So interferences are always there, but it's the politicians and the people of individual country that has to decide on the basis of what they promote a regime change or they stand for regime change and to what level, using their own systems and democratic principles, or sometimes if the regime himself provokes the people, it can go on the wrong direction and the wrong aspect. But I think Africa now is getting the right direction of democracy in which the regimes are changed on the basis of what has been agreed. But you know, sometimes mistakes happen here and there, but the prospect of the continent moving towards the right direction of democracy is much, much better than in many times in the past, I think.
Kaya, if you don't mind, let me just go to channels at TV Lagos, because ENSA has already gotten the opportunity and we're running out of time. Just hold on. Quick one, quick one.
Your Excellencies, thank you. My name is Betty Dibia from Channels TV Lagos. I just want to follow up on Sophie's last question regarding that a structured interface or regular sessions with sitting heads of government. How beneficial do you think this will be in bringing about the change that you're so passionate about? Because from all you've been saying today, yesterday, President Mbeki, you said, let's take this beyond having nice conversations. Thank you.
But no, sorry, with regard to that question, I hope I understood the question. That what would happen with regard to the outcome of this session of the African Leadership Forum, as has happened with the previous ones, is that a report will be prepared, its destination, one of the people that must receive it is the African Union. So the chairperson of the African Union, currently President Conde of Guinea, must receive that report. The chair of the Commission of the African Union must receive that report. So the structures, the regional economic communities. So these organized structures of the continent must receive this report, not so that they can just read, but as you would have heard in the draft statement, it had specific proposals to make at the end. So we're hoping that therefore, these African institutions will therefore interact and act on the matters that are raised. And I'm quite certain that if these AU structures wanted to talk to the foundations or to all of us here as former heads of state about the issues that we're suggesting, we would all of us be very ready to engage the African Union in that regard. Because indeed, we are taking these matters seriously, as they were discussed by the Leadership Forum. And really would therefore like the people who are in government, who are sitting in positions of authority, to follow up on these issues, which we believe are indeed very important in terms of the future of the continent, with regard to the topic that we're discussing now about peace, stability, sustainability, and all of that. So that's what we will do anyway. And I'm saying we would be ready to engage them. It's in that context that we would then raise this issue, that one of the matters that was raised is that there's also a desire to have an interactive session of this kind between you sitting heads of state and government with the South African citizens. But just to add, the last thing that was raised about regime change. Of course, the one outstanding instance we have on the continent, example of that, the point that was made is correct. That, I mean, we as Africans were saying, if there must be changes of government, it's our responsibility as Africans to change our governments. But you had this instance which we've spoken about here of Libya. because that resolution that was passed by the Security Council in 2011 about protection of civilians, it was what is so-called right to protect. In fact, that changed. You had the then heads of government, President Obama, Cameron in the UK, Sarkozy. In France, they even wrote a joint article, which was published in some of the newspapers, saying that, yes, indeed, the mandate was to protect civilians, but in fact, you can't protect civilians while Gaddafi is in power. So they made a public commitment for regime change. And indeed effected regime change and produced the crisis that we now have, not only in Libya, but in the Maghreb, in the Sahel, and everywhere. That's an example of regime change. But as Africans, I think the point that the President was making, we are insisting and we're very glad that the process of democratization among our countries has given the power to the people of Africa to determine who governs them. Thanks.
Kaya, 2 seconds.
Hold on.
Oh, sorry.
Let me put my neck forward. On this question of consultations or joint discussions between incumbents and former presidents, I really would plead that this happen at the national as well as the regional level. Because like it or not, we are part of history, and there's something that can be learned from that history, and especially when we are still alive as opposed to the archives. There is a tendency, I believe, in Africa, I don't know about here, but quite a number of African countries, that when you have an election and a change of government, that is equivalent to a new creation. That's impossible. You can't be creating a state with every election. So the past matters, and it should be taken into account. I have stuck my neck out, but I don't mind.
It's perfectly fine, Excellency, if you respond.
Yeah,
2 seconds, Kaya, we need to finish.
Just a very brief question. Kylie Kumalo here from ENCA. Former President Begi, you talked about the issue of terrorism in Africa, and also saying that there is a lack of, the architecture to try and address this issue. And it's quite a massive issue in light of the presence of Al-Shabaab and Boko Haram and other insurgency groups. In terms of the leadership forum, what have you recommended that the continent should do so that we can turn a tide against this huge challenge, especially in the context of security? Thank you.
Well, I mean, in terms of the leadership forum, we raise this issue as one of the matters which needs discussion. The point we're making about the absence of a global architecture to deal with the matter of terrorism is because you see this happening. You've got, for instance, Daesh, ISIS in Iraq and Syria. You have an intervention by the Russians on their own, and an intervention by the Americans on their own, and then others. Nobody has referred the matter to a central authority. Like, let's get a mandate from the Security Council about how to deal with terrorism. I'm saying that that's a global problem. So the recommendation from our side was that this would be a matter that coming out of the forum, that is a matter that needs to be worked on. I'm sure the foundations that convened the forum can start that. But this, again, is one of the recommendations that would go to the AU. The AU, as you know, has got its own convention against terrorism. But that's an African convention. We're talking about the global architecture. That's a matter that the AU also would have to follow up on.
Thank you, Excellency. And to thank the media, that task I'm going to leave to Excellency Mohammed.
Thank you very much. I would like to reiterate the gratefulness of the forum for the coverage that the media has made in the last 2 days, yesterday and today. We've been receiving all the positive feedback of very, very, very different people throughout the continent. So I would like, on behalf of my colleagues, to say thank you very much for that positive media coverage that you made, which we hope that it will become a habit of the African media to cover always the positive and portray the positive news to our people. I would also like to thank the organizers and people who are representing the communication department of the forum, with these two great organizations. And lastly, I would like to again say thank you for the two organizations who have always been standing for improving the quality of leadership of Africa. And I'm seeing a very, very strong and positive prospect for the future leaders of Africa. This forum will produce issues and people who feel themselves as stakeholders in the leadership of the African continent, where issues are presented and stakeholders are engaged for the deliberation of those issues. It's not in one forum, but for different forums in the past and the upcoming one, always there have been issues that have been raised and deliberated, and the ones we have deliberated in these 2 days was really great. And I have again to say thanks for President Mkapa and President Mbeki and their team who organized this matter. Finally, I conclude, I ask my colleagues to give a clap to the media people.
No, thank you from me. Excellencies, thank you very much.
Can we now ask the members of the youth to come in and their facilitator or MC to come and take the chair? We will bring back the former head.